Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here doing my review for the series premiere of The Last of Us TV show. Of course, I'm behind by a day. I think that's because of my schedule. This is going to be a Monday show for me, which means the reviews are going to be Tuesday reviews. But really enjoyed it. It was really good. I really enjoyed The Last of Us as far as the video game. As you can see, got one, got two. Interesting thing. My perspective on The Last of Us, I haven't played since the PS3. I did not play the remaster on PS4. I, of course, don't have the PS5 version, which is now titled Part 1. I've only played this, and I played it maybe 2 or 3 times, and that's it. Played, of course, a bunch of multiplayer. That's almost 10 years ago at this point. So yeah, my perspective on this is very interesting because I'm like in this weird in-between of like new viewer and of course someone who knows the whole story, because I know how things go, but the little moments, like kind of watching them in town and stuff and being like, okay, I remember that from the game. It's like, okay, this is how they kind of switch things around, so you don't go through like that weird alleyway and stuff, which was like the most obvious fight scene ever, where it was like you walk into it and it's just a bunch of obvious boxes. One of my favorite things about 2 was that every area looked really organic compared to the first game. But they switch that around, they go underground. That's where we see our first clicker, and that's where we really get, they did a reference to it actually, which I thought was really cool. So of course they've changed the spores, they have tendrils now that come out, so I'm very curious how that's going to play when they eventually show someone getting infected up close. I'm curious how that's going to end up looking. So I like how that was handled. It's like, all right, here's your first kind of look. There is a clicker at the very end of the episode. I didn't realize this till I saw something else. When they're doing the thunderstorm and you hear the clicker, it's actually on screen. It's at the very top of the building, like on the left. And it's almost like a few buildings back, and it looks exact from the game. Like I swear it was just a little CG rig, and they shrunk it down, and they're like, just play the animation from the video game right here. And it was literally, it was probably just a PS4 model, just like bloop, probably PS5 model, and they were just like, just throw it in there, just throw it in there. So who knows? That could have literally just been a thing from the game, just plopped right in the background. But it's actually in the final scene. Of course, it kind of sucks that we don't get to see them fight the first clicker, but of course that's going to be the very next episode, so I'm looking forward to that. I feel like there's not much to say. I love what they did as far as expanding the opening. I think it was actually really cool to see a lot of the other characters, because video games, very rarely do they switch from like place to place, and I think the whole point of The Last of Us video games is like, here's the one person that you have to be embedded with. So that's not really what they do, but for a TV show it's like, hey, these are the main players, so here's everyone that matters, at least at the very beginning. Here's all the characters, here's who they are outside of Joel, even though he's of course the main character, but here's who these characters are outside of him. And here's also, especially if you play the games, it gives you a lot of extra depth where it's like, oh, I guess this could be what was happening during this moment. This is the relationship with these 2 characters, where like we don't see Ellie from that perspective in the video game. And I thought that was really cool. It's like she's introduced to us when Joel sees her. So it's like, okay, that's a cool little change. You get a bit of backstory, and they, of course, change things up. You don't have to like, go and stealthing people at the docks or whatever. But I liked it, very intense hallway sequence. That battery, that was a funny, I don't know why, but I kind of laughed when they did the battery thing, and I was like, that thing's like exploded. It was like, didn't they see that as soon as he walked in? Like, did they just walk in guns blazing? Because if I saw that battery, I'm like, maybe that, after the firefight, that's why it looked like that. But I'm like, that typically doesn't happen like in an instant, it was fairly recent. So I'm like, they didn't see that as soon as he opened the door. But definitely funny. I don't know why, it just made me laugh when I saw it. I was like, that thing is effed up. Like anyone would have known that was bad. But I enjoyed how they handled that, some of the stuff that they changed, the extra time with Sarah, which I think was pretty interesting, especially for people that obviously didn't play the game. Thought it was well done. It was almost like 1-to-1 as far as like that actual sequence. I was like, man, it's crazy. I think even the camera angle was like positioned exactly the same when he was hugging her. But really enjoyed that. Actually, that part, oddly enough, leads to like, as far as the casting, I thought everybody was good. I swear the dude that plays Tommy sounded exactly like Tommy. Like there were some moments where Pedro Pascal was like, he sounded like Joel. I think it was one of the scenes even in the trailer where they had, and it was like, wow, that sounded exact. They definitely had moments like that, but I don't know what it was. And I've played 2, well, I guess that was 2 years ago at this point as well, but just his voice, I was like, for some reason to me, I was like, that sounds exactly like Tommy, especially when he was on the phone and it was like, they had to put the little effect on it. I was like, that's literally just Tommy from the game. It was oddly uncanny. And obviously if I heard it, next to each other, I'd be like, oh, they don't sound anything alike. But in my brain, he sounds exactly like Tommy. I could be totally wrong because it's been a minute since I played 2, but I was like, that's almost exact. So maybe I'm crazy, but that's something I noticed. But really cool intro to it. They changed things around with Sarah where she actually goes next door and finds their neighbor. They have that scene early on, which is one of my favorite things in horror movies, when they have like the blurry thing in the background and it's like slowly changing or something weird's happening and then it goes back to normal. I love that. It's just unsettling. That's like one of my favorite things in horror movies. So I was like, I love that sequence. That was really good. And I was like, yep, she's infected. It's kind of starting to take over and stuff. And then, we see the results of that later on. But I love the way they handled that. Some of the other little sequences, like they actually do the moment where they drive past the burning house. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like they actually put that reference in there where they, drove out of their cul-de-sac, because that was a big difference for anyone who hadn't played the game. But it was one of the differences. They weren't in a cul-de-sac. They were kind of in their own sort of farmland a little bit. Like they were definitely had a next door neighbor, but it definitely wasn't like a cul-de-sac. So I was like, oh, that's cool. They actually still incorporated like the burning house just kind of being there. Then of course they go into the city. The car crashed. I thought that was definitely a great misdirection for everyone who played the game. It was like, here comes the truck coming in, and then they swerve, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then a plane comes down. I was like, that's insane. that's definitely more intense than a car crash, because it was like, okay, they basically combined the gas station exploding with the car crash, and it was just like, here's a plane crashing and a giant explosion, a giant chunk of a plane flies through the window and like takes the truck out. So that was a great way to do that. And then of course, super sad. And then we get the time skip. They actually changed the time frame of it, which I thought was very interesting. They throw in the line about terrorists because it was 2003. In the game, I think it was 2013 was when it initially happened. So they changed things around. I think just for that context to kind of put it there. And I guess for whatever reason, just to be like, hey, it's, their modern day is our modern day. And it's like, I guess that's why they did it. I don't know. But I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. Had, a little bit of context and, imagery for sure. They definitely had in there, which I thought was cool. But love the way they handled that. Like seeing the characters kind of doing their own things outside of Joel. And then of course, I thought the action was really good. And then of course we get the ending, which we were all expecting. And it was like, all right, here's this moment. They find out that she's infected. Joel beats up this dude who he actually knew, which was another thing that was like, okay, that makes that more entertaining, because unless I'm mistaken, once again, it's been like 10 years since I played that. I don't think you knew that guard at all in the actual game. It was just like a guard who was outside. So it's like, okay, they add that little attachment where it's like, he could escape, but then he thinks about his daughter and then is like, I got to do it. So I thought that was interesting. I like the way they handled that and made it a bit more personal. And then of course they escape and we have the very end and they play the 80s music, which was a great touch. But I like the way it was handled. I love the visuals of it. I'm super excited because the game, the show looks just like the game, where I would see stuff and I'm like, I haven't played the first game in 10 years. I've seen clips and stuff, especially from the part 1 trailer. So I've seen, the trailers and, seeing a little bit of the compound that they start in. So when I would see stuff, I'm like, man, that really looks like the game. Like they end on that shot of the two buildings like falling on each other. And there's only two things I think of when I think of two buildings on each other. It's The Last of Us and Idiocracy. And then that is really funny. You should see Idiocracy. If you haven't, it's hilarious. But those are the only two things. It's either the two buildings in The Last of Us or it's those two buildings tied together in Idiocracy. So that was great. I love the visuals for it. I'm very excited to see where they go from here. How they capture like the campus, how they capture, what they're going to do as far as like, with Bill and stuff, like how big are they going to make that? How many episodes is that going to be? Is it just going to be the one and then, they're in and then they're out? So I'm really curious about like the length of time we get in some of the places they go, where it's like, there's only like 3 characters here and then a bunch of monsters. So how do they play around with that? I'm actually really looking forward to seeing, just because I'm like, I'm curious how you handle that. Cause there are moments where it's like, okay, here's a decent little chunk of characters, but for the most part, it's 2 characters. And whenever they run into somebody, it's still only adding like a couple more people. Like the only time they might have a ton is really when they meet Tommy. And that's about it. So I'm curious how they're going to handle those solitary moments, because that's most of the game. It's 2 people, but still fairly solitary when it's just 2 people going across the country. So I'm actually really curious how they're going to handle some of that. The visuals, they have to make a reference to the fact that she can't swim. There has to be some part where she like pushes over a board or something, and then they're like, oh, there's this thing behind this board. Like they have to make a reference to those. That would be like, I don't know if they did that in Uncharted where they had to reference the crates, but I mean, Uncharted has like 4 games. The Last of Us has 1 and 2. And in that first game, there were so many crates, those little like just platforms she was getting on. And it was like, they have to make a reference to that at some point in this show. So if they don't do that, it's a 0 out of 10, obviously. But I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely looking forward to I think there's 9 episodes, 8 or 9 episodes, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how they handle that. And, like I said, what gets more time, what gets less time, what kind of gets things split, or, maybe the same amount of time, but we see another perspective. That I think would be cool. They did a lot of that, in this, kind of showing the characters outside of Joel. So I'm looking forward to it. I think all in all, this is really good. It's another great adaptation. I think we're in the era of great video game shows. Like, the movie stuff is working because we got Sonic. Sonic 1 and 2 I love. So we're definitely getting there at least a little bit on the movie front. But I think we're officially, like, we've been hitting it out of the park as far as like the video game shows. It's just been like, yeah, this is amazing. This is really good. So we've had Arcane, we've had Cyberpunk, and now we officially have The Last of Us. So maybe the next show is going to be maybe even better. Who knows? It depends on what it is. But we're in a good era as far as the shows go. I hope the movies get there. Like, I really just want Resident Evil done right. I don't want to get into it, but it's like, it's my favorite franchise. I just want it done right. Like, at some point in live action, can I just have Resident Evil? That's all I need. But until then, they're kind of zombies, so I'll enjoy it. But we'd love to know your thoughts on the premiere. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. Let me know your favorite parts about it, least favorite parts about it. Of course, what you guys are most excited to see as far as characters, moments, locations, even just, full on seasons. Obviously, the stuff with David, that's going to be great. I'm so curious how the internet's going to react to that, because there's a buttload of people that have played The Last of Us. There's a whole lot of people who also haven't. And I'm very curious how that David moment is just, what's winter? What is winter, So I'm looking forward to that for sure, because I'm like, that's good. That's going to be a heck of a moment. But either way, want to know your thoughts, so please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, thanks for watching.